My name is Elena Harper. I was 34 years old when my mother-in-law stood in front of an entire church hall, pointed toward the baby asleep in my arms, and said, "That boy was never a real Harper." The room went so quiet I could hear the tiny click of my son's pacifier against his blanket. My husband Grant stood 3 feet away from me in his navy suit, staring at the floor like the carpet had suddenly become the most important thing in the world. His sister, Lydia, looked down into her glass of punch, trying to hide a smile. The family attorney had one hand resting on a folder he had been trying to get me to sign for the past 20 minutes. And Margaret Harper, my mother-in-law, stood beneath a banner that said, "God bless Noah Harper," smiling as if she had just done something holy. Then she said it again, softer this time, but somehow crueler. A baptism does not make a child family. My son was 8 months old. He had no idea that the people clapping for him an hour earlier had already decided he was an inconvenience wrapped in white linen. He had no idea his grandmother had spent months calling him a trap, a mistake, and a problem with Grant's last name attached to it. I did not yell. I did not cry. I simply shifted Noah higher against my shoulder, looked Margaret straight in the face, and asked, "Is that what you believe?" Her smile tightened. She thought she had won because I sounded calm. People like Margaret always mistake calm for surrender. What she did not know was that I had spent almost 12 years working in the county records office. I knew what amended certificates looked like. I knew what legal acknowledgment meant. I knew the difference between blood and record, between gossip and proof, between a family story and a document filed under seal in a basement archive. And at that exact moment, while Margaret stood there pretending she had the right to decide who belonged to the Harper family, an old man named Arthur Bell walked through the side door of the church hall carrying a brown archival folder. He was not early. He was not late. He was exactly on time. Before I tell you what was inside that folder, I need to go back to the first time a Harper made me feel like a guest in my own marriage. I met Grant Harper at the county records office on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. He came in wearing a charcoal coat, carrying a leather document case, and looking slightly embarrassed to be standing in line behind a man renewing a fishing license. He was there to request certified copies related to one of his family's properties, a white farmhouse on Briar Lane that everyone in town knew as the Harper House. The Harpers were not famous. Exactly. They were the kind of family a small town treats as important because they have always been there. They always owned land. They always sat in the front pew. They always had their names on plaques inside public buildings. Harper Memorial Library, Harper Children's Garden, the William Harper Scholarship Fund. If you grew up in Faircross, you learned early that the Harper name entered a room before the person carrying it did. I did not grow up with a name like that. My mother ran the billing desk at a dental office. My father fixed heating systems until his knees gave out. I went to community college at night, took the first county job I could get, and slowly worked my way into records where everything was quiet, organized, and honest in a way people rarely are. A document does not flatter you. It does not pity you. It does not call you family at Christmas and erase you in private. It just says what happened. Grant was charming in a careful way. Not loud, not flashy, not the kind of man who made big promises. He asked questions, said please and thank you, and smiled when I explained why one of the property descriptions had to be pulled from the older index. "You make all this sound simple," he said. "It is simple," I told him. "People are the complicated part." He laughed like I had said something clever. A week later, he came back with another request. 2 weeks after that, he asked if I would have coffee with him. For the first year, Grant made me feel chosen. That is the dangerous thing about people who were raised to be admired. When they admire you, even briefly, it can feel like sunlight. He took me to quiet restaurants outside town. He remembered how I liked my coffee. He once drove 40 minutes because I mentioned a used bookstore I had never found time to visit. He told me his father, William, had died when Grant was in college, and that his mother had never really recovered from it. Mom is intense, he warned me before I met her, but she means well. That was the first lie I accepted because it was easier than seeing the truth. Margaret Harper lived in the original Harper house, the one with white columns, blue shutters, and a front porch wide enough for family photographs. She opened the door herself the first Sunday Grant brought me for lunch. She was elegant in the way some women become when they have spent decades turning control into a personality. Silver blonde hair cut just below her chin, pearl earrings, pale blue dress, a smile that touched everything except her eyes. "So," she said, looking me over, "you are Elena from Records. Not Elena, not the woman my son has been dating for 9 months. Elena from Records." "Yes, ma'am," I said. She kissed Grant on the cheek and touched his collar, smoothing something that was not wrinkled. "My son always did like practical women," she said. Grant laughed lightly, like it was a compliment. I smiled because I was still young enough to think politeness could protect me. Lunch was served in a dining room where every wall held framed photographs of Harpers, men in military uniforms, women in wedding dresses, children on ponies. William Harper appeared in half of them, broad-shouldered and serious, with Grant beside him in several pictures. But there was something strange about those photos. I could not name it then. I only remember noticing that Margaret watched me whenever my eyes moved toward William's face. Every time I asked about him, she answered with polished sentences that closed the subject. William gave this family its name. William believed in order. William understood duty. Never. William loved Grant. Never. Grant has his father's smile. Never. You would have liked him. Only sentences that sounded engraved. By the time Grant proposed, I had learned how Harper approval worked. You were never directly welcomed. You were evaluated until they found a shelf small enough to place you on. Margaret placed me on the practical shelf. I was useful, respectable enough, not embarrassing, but never quite equal. At our engagement dinner, Lydia Harper, Grant's older sister, raised her glass and said, "To Elena, she may not come from much, but she keeps excellent records." Everyone laughed, even Grant. I told myself it was harmless. That is how humiliation often begins. Not as a blow, but as a joke you are expected to survive gracefully. Our wedding was beautiful because Margaret arranged it that way. She chose the flowers, the church, the seating plan, even the cake flavor. When I objected, Grant said, "She just wants the day to be special." But every beautiful thing that day seemed to have Margaret's fingerprints on it. I remember standing in my wedding dress, waiting in the side room of the church when Margaret came in and adjusted my veil without asking. "You look lovely," she said. Simple, but lovely. Then she leaned close enough that only I could hear. "Grant has always had a generous heart. Try not to take advantage of it." I should have turned around right then. I should have asked what she meant. Instead, I swallowed the words because the church was full. My mother was crying happy tears, and Grant was waiting at the altar. I still believed peace was something you could earn by being reasonable. For the first 2 years of marriage, I tried very hard to become the kind of wife the Harpers could not criticize. I worked full-time. I kept our house neat. I remembered birthdays. I showed up to Sunday lunches, church fundraisers, holiday dinners, and every family event where Margaret introduced me as Grant's wife from the county office. Not daughter-in-law, not Elena, Grant's wife from the county office. When people asked when we planned to have children, Margaret answered before I could. "When God sends the right time," she would say, placing a hand on Grant's shoulder. "A Harper child is not something one rushes into." It sounded spiritual. It was not. It was ownership. When I became pregnant, Grant cried, "I want to be honest about that." In the privacy of our bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed with the little plastic test between us, he cried and held me and whispered, We're going to be okay. For one night, I believed him. Then we told Margaret. She did not cry. She did not hug me. She did not ask how I felt. She looked at Grant first. Then she looked at me. Was this planned, she asked, or convenient? Grant stiffened, but he did not correct her. I waited. There are moments in a marriage when love either stands up or sits down. Grant sat down. He said, "Mom, come on." In the tired voice of a man who wanted a storm to pass, "Not a wrong to be righted." Margaret smiled. "I am only asking what everyone will wonder." That sentence became the seed of everything that followed. By my 5th month, people at church were touching my arm with pity disguised as kindness. "How fortunate," one woman said, granted Another customer never told me Margaret was adjusting beautifully under the circumstances. I was a married woman carrying my husband's child. And somehow, the town had been taught to speak as if I had committed a strategic crime. Lydia started making comments at family dinners. "Elena is lucky," she said once, cutting into a roast. "Some women wait years to secure their place." Grant told me not to take it personally. That became his favorite sentence. Do not take it personally when my mother questions your motives. Do not take it personally when my sister jokes about your background. Do not take it personally when my family treats our baby like a legal complication. The problem with being told not to take things personally is that the people saying it are always very comfortable making things personal. Noah was born on a cold morning in February. He came into the world angry and red-faced, with strong lungs and one hand curled so tightly around my finger that I started sobbing before the nurse even placed the blanket over him. Grant was there. He kissed my forehead. He said Noah was perfect. For a few hours, in that hospital room, we were a family untouched by anyone else's opinion. Then Margaret arrived. She wore cream-colored wool and brought a silver rattle engraved with the Harper crest. I remember that because it struck me as absurd. My son was 6 hours old and she had already brought branding. She stood beside the bassinet, looked down at Noah, and said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "He has your eyes." I smiled because I thought it was a softening. Margaret added, "Shame." Grant said, "Mom." Again, that tired voice. Again, no defense. Margaret picked up the silver rattle and placed it on the little table beside me on the bed. "Well," she said, "what is done is done." That was how my son was welcomed into the Harper family. Not with joy, not with wonder, with resignation. After Noah came home, Margaret's visits were never about helping. They were inspections. She checked whether I was breastfeeding. She commented on the laundry. She asked why I did not dress Noah in the outfits she bought, most of which had Harper monograms stitched across the chest like uniforms. When Noah cried, she said he had my temperament. When he slept, she said he had Grant's dignity. When he reached for me instead of her, she said I was making him clingy. The first time she called him that child instead of Noah, I was so tired I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. But my mother heard it too. We were standing in the kitchen while Margaret sat in the living room holding Noah stiffly, like he was an expensive vase she suspected might be fake. My mother looked at me and whispered, "Honey, why do you let her talk like that?" I had no answer that sounded good. "Because I am tired. Because Grant says she needs time. Because I keep thinking if I stay calm enough, she will run out of reasons to dislike me." Because I did not yet understand that Margaret didn't need reasons. She had already chosen her conclusion. Everything else was decoration. The baptism was Margaret's idea. She called when Noah was 6 months old and said the family expected it. The family, I repeated. Yes, she said. A child carrying the Harper name should be baptized properly. There it was again, carrying the name. Not loved by the family, not welcomed into the faith. Carrying the name. Grant wanted to do it. It will make Mom feel better, he said. I was folding Noah's tiny pajamas on the bed. I remember smoothing the sleeves flat because my hands needed something gentle to do. What about me? I asked. Grant blinked. What? Will it make me feel better? He sighed. Elena, please don't turn this into another thing. Another thing. That was when I realized all my pain had become an inconvenience to him. Still, I agreed to the baptism. Not for Margaret, not for Grant, for Noah. I wanted him to have one day where the family said his name in public and could not pretend he did not exist. I did not know Margaret was planning something very different. The first warning came 2 weeks before the ceremony. Samuel Price, the Harper family attorney, requested an appointment with me at the records office. That alone was unusual. Samuel did not need me for Harper business. He had assistants, clerks, junior attorneys, and the kind of confidence that makes men believe every counter is built for them to lean over. He arrived wearing a brown suit and a smile so thin it might as well have been drawn on. Elena, he said, I wanted to speak with you informally. Then, you picked a strange place, I said. This is a government office. His smile twitched. It concerns Noah's future. That got my attention. He explained that the Harper Family Trust had provisions for minor descendants. There were administrative forms. Nothing alarming, nothing adversarial. Since Grant was busy and Margaret understood the family structure best, they thought it would be wise for me to sign a consent allowing Margaret to serve as a managing family representative for any benefits connected to Noah. I asked to see the documents. He slid a folder toward me. The first page was full of friendly language: support, continuity, tradition, family, stewardship. The second page was less friendly. By the third, I understood exactly what it was. They wanted me to give Margaret practical control over any trust interest assigned to my son. I looked up. Why would I sign this? Samuel gave a little chuckle. Because it is standard. No, I said, it may be familiar to you. That does not make it standard. His eyes cooled. You work with records, Elena. Not trusts. I closed the folder. And yet I can still read. That was the first time I saw fear flicker across Samuel Price's face. Not much, just enough. He recovered quickly and told me to take my time, but not too much time, because Margaret hoped to have everything settled by the baptism. Why the baptism? I asked. He tapped the folder once. It is a meaningful family occasion. Meaningful. That word followed me the rest of the day. At 5 o'clock, after the public counters closed, I went downstairs to the older archive room to help with a digitization batch. The county had been slowly scanning old paper records for years, and I often stayed late because I liked the quiet. There were metal shelves, dust, cardboard boxes, and the faint smell of paper that had outlived the people who argued over it. That night, I was sorting index references when I saw the Harper name, not because I was looking for it. That matters. I was not digging through private files. I was not misusing my position. I was doing my job, handling a batch of historical indexes scheduled for digitization. The line read, Grant William Harper, amended record. I stared at it longer than I should have. Amended records were not rare. Names changed. Fathers acknowledged children later. Clerical errors were corrected. Adoptions were sealed. Life was complicated, and records reflected that. But the date caught my eye. The amendment had been filed almost 3 years after Grant's birth. 3 years. I wrote the file number on the batch log exactly as I was supposed to and kept working. But something small had opened in my mind. A crack. The next morning, Margaret came into the records office. She never came there. Margaret sent people, Margaret summoned people. Margaret did not stand under fluorescent lights waiting for a ticket number. She wore a dark green dress, pearls, and the expression of a woman trying very hard not to look nervous. When she saw me behind the counter, her face changed. "Elena," she said, "I did not realize you were working today." "It's Wednesday," I said. "I work every Wednesday." She looked annoyed, as if my schedule had insulted her. She requested certified copies tied to the Harper Trust and several old property transfers. Her tone was pleasant enough for the room, sharp enough for me. "These papers are important," she said. "Some clerks misunderstand old family matters." "Then it's good we follow the index," I said. She held my gaze for a second too long. "Some family histories are best left undisturbed." That was not a warning, it was a confession, wearing gloves. After she left, I found Arthur Bell in the back room. Arthur had retired 5 years earlier but still came in twice a week as a part-time archival consultant because he knew the old filing systems better than anyone alive. He was tall, stooped, with white hair and wire-rimmed glasses. And he moved through the archives like a priest through a chapel. I did not ask him to show me anything confidential. I asked a general question. "Arthur, when an old birth record says amended, how often is the original preserved?" He looked at me over his glasses. "Often enough. And if the amendment involved acknowledgment, then the original and the acknowledgment may both exist, depending on the year." He paused. "Why?" I hesitated. He studied my face, then glanced toward the public counter where Margaret had stood an hour earlier. "Some family records are quiet," he said, "because people want them quiet. Not because they are clean." I did not sleep well that night. Not because I knew anything yet. Because I had begun to suspect that Margaret's obsession with blood was not pride. It was fear. Once you see fear behind cruelty, certain things become easier to understand. Margaret never said William loved Grant. Margaret always said William gave the family a name. Margaret hated the word amended. Margaret wanted me to sign away control of Noah's trust interest before the baptism. Margaret called blood sacred, but used legal documents when blood was inconvenient. A week before the baptism, Grant came home late and found me reading the documents Samuel had given me. He loosened his tie in the doorway. "You're still looking at that?" "Yes." "Elena, it's just paperwork." "That's what people say when they don't want you to read it." He rubbed his face. "Can we please not fight about this? Mom is trying." "No," I said quietly. "Your mother is trying to get legal control over something connected to our son." He frowned. "That is not fair." "Then explain it." He opened his mouth, but nothing useful came out. That had become Grant's pattern. He defended Margaret emotionally, but could not defend her logically. "She knows the trust," he said finally. "I know my son." He looked at me as if I had made things difficult on purpose. "You always do this." I laughed once, not because it was funny. "What do I do?" "You act like everyone is trying to hurt you." I looked at the folder in my lap, at the signature line with my name printed beneath it. "Grant, your family has spent 8 months treating Noah like a stain on the Harper name. Now they want me to give them authority over his rights. I am not imagining that." He stepped into the room. "You are making Mom sound like a monster." "No," I said. "I'm repeating her behavior in order." His face hardened. That was the moment I lost something. Not love. Love had been the one-pun-ulay-shen. For Sundays, Tania. For months, worn down by silence and excuses, I lost the belief that if I explained my pain clearly enough, Grant would choose me. He would not. He had already chosen the easier room. The day of the baptism was bright and cold. Margaret had arranged white flowers at the church entrance and blue ribbons along the pews. She had hired a photographer. There were printed programs with Noah's full name on the front. Noah James Harper. Seeing it there did something strange to me. It hurt, because the same people who printed his name in silver ink still spoke about him like he had smuggled himself into the family. My mother sat in the third row, wearing the lavender dress she saved for important days. She held my hand before the ceremony and whispered, "You do not have to make these people love him. He is already loved." I nodded, but I was not sure I believed that was enough. During the baptism itself, Noah behaved beautifully. He stared at the stained glass windows. He grabbed the pastor's sleeve. He only cried once when the water touched his forehead. Everyone laughed softly. For one brief moment, it almost looked like joy. Then we moved into the church hall. Margaret had arranged the reception with military precision. White tablecloths, silver trays, a cake with Noah's name, a framed photograph of William Harper placed near the guest book, as if the dead patriarch had been invited to approve everything. What I noticed first was not what was there. It was what was missing. There were no pictures of me pregnant, no photograph of me holding Noah at the hospital, no sign that said, "Son of Elena and Grant." The entire room had been arranged to absorb my child into the Harper family while erasing the woman who carried him. Samuel Price approached me near the punch table. "Elena," he said warmly, "this might be a good time." He had the folder. Of course he did. I looked at Grant. He would not meet my eyes. Samuel lowered his voice. "With everyone here, it is convenient to finalize small family matters." "Small?" I asked. "Administrative. My son's rights are not administrative, Tree." His smile faded. Margaret appeared beside him as if she'd been waiting for her cue. "Do not be dramatic," she said. I was holding Noah with one arm. With the other, I pulled the folder slightly toward me and opened to the signature page. "I am not signing today." Margaret's eyes flashed. "Excuse me?" "I said I am not signing today." Lydia, who had been standing nearby with two cousins, turned her head. Grant said my name under his breath. Margaret smiled at the watching relatives. "Elena is overwhelmed," she announced lightly. "New mothers can be emotional." There it was, the public translation. My caution became instability. My refusal became hormones. My concern became drama. I felt the old instinct rise in me. Smooth it over, smile, make it smaller, protect the room from discomfort. Then Noah stirred against my shoulder. His little hand opened and closed against my collar. And suddenly I understood something so clearly. It felt like a door unlocking. Every time I swallowed Margaret's cruelty, I was not keeping peace. I was teaching my son what he should one day tolerate. So I said, clearly enough for the nearest tables to hear, "I am not overwhelmed. I am reading before I sign." The room shifted. Small town rooms have weather. Anyone who has lived in one knows this. You can feel a tension gathering before people admit they are listening. Margaret felt it too. Her smile changed. "You should be grateful," she said. "For what?" "For the name. For the support. For the fact that Grant did not walk away when many men would have." My mother stood up. Grant looked toward her, alarmed, but I shook my head slightly. This was not my mother's fight. Not anymore. Margaret took one step closer. "You came into this family with nothing. You were given a home, a position, a child with a name worth having. And still, you stand here questioning us?" I looked at Grant. "Are you going to say anything?" He swallowed. "Mom, maybe not here, not stop, not apologize. Not Elena is my wife and Noah is my son. Maybe not here." Margaret heard the weakness and walked straight through it. "Not here?" she asked, raising her voice. "Everyone here has spent months pretending. Maybe it is time someone said the truth." The hall went silent. Noah's pacifier clicked against his blanket. Margaret turned slightly so the room could see her grief, her dignity, her performance. That boy was never a real Harper. A woman near the cake gasped. Lydia's mouth opened, but no words came. Grant closed his eyes. Margaret continued, each word cleaner and colder than the last. A baptism does not make him family. A last name does not erase the way he got here. Ila! Elena knew exactly what she was doing. She trapped my son with a child, and now she wants to question the family that was merciful enough to accept him. My mother was crying, not loudly. That somehow made it worse. I looked down at Noah. He had fallen back asleep. His eyelashes rested against his cheeks. He trusted the arms holding him because babies do not know when a room has turned against them. I looked back at Margaret. Is that what you believe? She blinked. What? Is that what you believe? I asked again. That Noah is not a real Harper. Her chin lifted. I know what everyone knows. That sentence almost made me smile. Because people like Margaret build entire lives on everyone knows. Everyone knows Elena trapped Grant. Everyone knows Noah is a complication. Everyone knows the Harper name means blood. Everyone knows what Margaret permits them to know. I shifted Noah gently and said, then maybe we should let the records decide. Samuel Price's face changed. First, not Margaret's, not Grant's, Samuel's. Because he understood before the rest of them that I had not said feelings. I had said records. At that exact moment, the side door opened. Arthur Bell stepped into the church hall carrying a brown archival folder tied with cotton tape. He looked completely out of place among the flowers and silver trays. His gray suit was old, his shoes were wet from the parking lot, and his expression was calm in a way only truly careful people can manage. Margaret turned. Who is that? I said. That is Arthur Bell. He worked county records for 42 years. Samuel moved toward him. This is a private family event. Arthur looked at him mildly. I was asked to deliver certified archival copies to Mrs. Elena Harper regarding a pending review of public and probate records. Margaret's face drained of color so quickly it was like watching a curtain fall. What review? She asked. I answered without looking away from her. The one you made necessary. Grant stepped toward me. Elena, what did you do? That was the first time he had sounded truly frightened all day. Not when his mother humiliated his wife, not when she denied his son, only when documents entered the room. I said, I asked a question. Arthur placed the folder on the table beside the unsigned trust forms. Samuel reached for it. Arthur put one hand gently over the folder. These copies are addressed to Mrs. Harper. Samuel stiffened. I represent the Harper family. Arthur looked around the room, then back at him. Apparently that is becoming a complicated statement. No one laughed. I handed Noah to my mother. She took him with trembling arms, kissed the top of his head, and stepped beside me rather than behind me. I untied the cotton tape. The sound was small. It cut through the hall like a match being struck. Inside were certified copies, each page stamped and sealed. I had not seen them before that moment, not fully. I had requested a lawful review of documents connected to the trust forms I was being pressured to sign, and Arthur had brought what the review produced. That distinction mattered to me. I had not stolen anything. I had not searched private medical records. I had not crept through sealed files. I had done what Margaret had always counted on me being too polite to do. I asked the system to show its work. First page was Grant's current birth certificate. Grant William Harper. Father. William James Harper. Mother. Margaret Elaine Harper. The room saw nothing unusual. Margaret let out a breath. Then I lifted the second page. It was older, slightly blurred from the archived original. Grant's name appeared differently in the first filing. Grant William Ellis. Mother. Margaret Elaine Ellis. Father. blank. There are silences that are empty. And there are silences that are full of things breaking. This was the second kind. Lydia whispered, "What is that?" Margaret's lips parted. Grant stared at the page like it was written in a language he had once known and chosen to forget. I read only the stamp notation. Original birth record prior to amendment. Samuel said sharply, "That is not relevant." Arthur said, "It is relevant if the trust documents rely on Harper lineage." Samuel turned on him. "You are not an attorney." "No," Arthur said. "I am the man who knows where your attorney should have looked." I lifted the third page. Legal acknowledgment of minor child. Executed by William James Harper. Filed nearly 3 years after Grant's birth. I read the sentence slowly because I wanted every person in that room to hear what a document sounds like when it refuses to flatter anyone. William James Harper hereby acknowledges Grant William Ellis as his lawful son, with all rights, privileges, and standing of a child born to the marriage. Margaret gripped the back of a chair. Lydia looked at Grant. Grant looked at his mother. And I saw it then. He had not known. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered him standing silent while his mother called our son false. Margaret whispered, "William loved him." No one had accused William of not loving him. That was the strange thing about truth. It does not always destroy love. Sometimes it only destroys the lies people built around it. I looked at Margaret. "So Grant became a Harper by legal recognition." She said nothing. I continued, my voice even. "By a document." Her eyes filled with something that might have been rage or terror. "That is different." "Why?" "Because William chose him." "And Grant chose Noah," I said. Grant flinched. I turned to him. "Didn't you?" He looked at the room, at his mother, at the documents, at Noah asleep in my mother's arms. Finally, Grant said, "Of course I did." It was the right answer. It came years too late. Margaret shook her head. "This is a private matter?" I almost laughed. "You made my son's belonging a public matter 5 minutes ago." Samuel tried again to take control. "Whatever emotional interpretation Mrs. Harper is placing on these records, the trust documents are separate. The family can discuss this privately." Arthur cleared his throat. "There is more." Samuel closed his eyes. Margaret said, "No." One word, not confused, not curious, afraid. Arthur looked at me. I nodded. He removed another certified copy from the folder. This one was from William Harper's probate file. I had seen language like it only once before, years earlier, in a different family dispute. Old money has a way of writing fear into legal clauses and calling it planning. Samuel recognized the page before I read it. His face went gray. I said, "Mr. Price, would you like to read it?" He said nothing, so I did. "In the event that any descendant of mine is acknowledged by law, registered under the Harper name, and leaves lawful issue, such issue shall not be excluded from the primary family trust on claims of blood, birth circumstance, maternal dispute, or private family objection." I paused. The room did not move. I continued. "The first minor child of the next generation lawfully registered under the Harper name shall receive protected beneficiary status, and no adult family representative may assume control of said interest without the consent of the child's legal mother or by order of the probate court." Somewhere near the back of the room, and a chair creaked, Noah made a soft sound in his sleep. I looked at Margaret. "The first minor child of the next generation lawfully registered under the Harper name." Arthur said quietly, "That would be Noah James Harper." Lydia sat down. Samuel looked like a man watching a bridge collapse while standing on it. Margaret whispered, "William would never do that to me." And there it was, not to Grant, not to the family, to me. Because Margaret had always understood family as something that belonged to her. William's name, William's house, William's legacy, William's forgiveness. Even William's silence. But William Harper, dead for more than a decade, had written one thing she could not charm, shame, or bully into obedience: a clause. I said, maybe William knew what could happen when adults care more about names than children. Margaret's eyes snapped to mine. You do not get to speak for my husband. No, I said, but his documents speak very clearly. Grant stepped forward. Mom, is this true? Margaret turned on him. You are my son. That is not what I asked. The room held its breath. For once, Grant sounded like a man who wanted an answer. Margaret looked at him, and for the first time since I had known her, she did not look powerful. She looked cornered. William raised you, she said. Grant's voice dropped. Who was my father? Margaret pressed one hand to her chest. This is not the place. I almost admired the consistency. When she wanted to humiliate my baby, the church hall was exactly the place. When the truth turned toward her, suddenly, privacy became sacred. Grant said again, who was my father? She did not answer. That was answer enough. Lydia stood so abruptly her chair scraped backward. You knew? She asked Margaret. Margaret turned toward her daughter. I did what I had to do. Lydia laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. You spent my entire life talking about Harper blood. I protected this family. No, Lydia said, you protected yourself. I would like to tell you I enjoyed watching them turn on each other. I did not. Vindication is not always sweet. Sometimes it is just heavy. Because even in that moment, with Margaret exposed and Samuel silenced and Grant looking like the floor had vanished beneath him, my son was still asleep in a room where his grandmother had called him fake. No document could unsay that. It could only make sure she never got rewarded for it. Samuel finally gathered himself. I must advise everyone present that these documents should not be discussed further without counsel. Arthur looked at the unsigned folder on the table. That would have been wise advice before you brought trust consent papers to a baptism. A murmur moved through the hall. People were beginning to understand. Not all at once. Small towns rarely surrender a story quickly, but they were realizing the shape of it. Margaret had called Noah not a real Harper. Grant was a Harper because William legally made him one. William's will protected legal descendants, not blood claims. Noah was legally Grant's son, and Margaret had tried to pressure me into signing control away minutes before denying my child's place in the family. That was the part that mattered most. Not the old scandal, not Margaret's past, the attempt. She had used public shame as like leverage, like a way. She had tried to make me feel so small, so unwanted, so grateful for scraps, that I would sign my son's future into her hands. I picked up Samuel's folder and placed it beside William's clause. I will not be signing this. Samuel said, Elena, let's not make a rash decision. I looked at him. A rash decision is bringing legal documents to a church reception and hoping a mother is too humiliated to read them. He had no reply. Grant moved closer to me. Elena, please. We need to talk. I looked at the man I had married. There were cake crumbs on his sleeve, his tie was slightly crooked, his eyes were red, not from defending us, but from discovering something about himself. Part of me hurt for him. Another part of me was tired of making his pain larger than mine. We did need to talk, I said, for months. Every time your mother insulted me, every time your sister laughed, every time Noah was treated like a problem. We needed to talk when your attorney brought papers about our son without telling me the truth, but you did not want to talk then. He swallowed. I didn't know about this. No, I said, but you knew about that. I pointed toward the space where Margaret had stood when she words. You knew she was cruel. You knew she was wrong. You knew your son deserved better. And you still waited to see whether silence would cost you anything. His face folded. Elena, I shook my head. Not here. It was the same phrase he had offered his mother earlier. But in my mouth, it meant something different. It meant the performance was over. Margaret stepped toward me, suddenly desperate. "You cannot take him." I looked at her. "Take who?" "My grandson." The word almost stunned me. Grandson. Now that the trust recognized him, and the name returned. Now that William's clause protected him, Noah belonged. Now that documents made him valuable, Margaret remembered the title she had refused to honor. I said, "You called him that, boy." Her lips trembled. I was upset. "You were prepared." That landed. Because it was true, and everyone knew it. Cruelty that precise is rarely spontaneous. I continued. "You arranged the room, you brought the attorney, you placed the forms beside the cake. You waited until witnesses were watching. You thought shame would do what the law might not." Margaret's face hardened again. There she was, the matriarch returning because apology required a humility she had never practiced. "You ungrateful little clerk," she said. The words were quieter than the first insult, but somehow uglier. I smiled then. Not because I was amused, because after all those years, she still did not understand what my job had taught me. Clerks preserve what powerful people hope will disappear. I said, "Yes, I am a clerk. That is why I read before I sign." My mother shifted Noah in her arms and stepped to my side. "We are leaving," she said. Grant reached for the diaper bag automatically. I stopped him. "I've got it." It was a small sentence. It ended more than the afternoon. I packed slowly because I wanted no one to mistake my leaving for a Yen's running, bottle, blanket, extra clothes. The silver rattle Margaret had brought to the hospital months earlier was sitting in the memory basket near the guest book. I picked it up, looked at the engraved Harper crest, and placed it on the table in front of Margaret. "He does not need this," I said. Margaret looked as if I had slapped her. Maybe I had, not with my hand, with refusal. Arthur gathered the certified copies and handed them back to me. "Keep them with your attorney," he said, quietly. "I will." Samuel heard that and looked up sharply. "Your attorney?" I met his eyes. "You did not think I would keep using yours, did you?" That was when I saw it fully. The consequence, not the scandal, not the whispers, not the embarrassment. Control had shifted. For years, Margaret's power came from being the person who defined the family story. Samuel wrote it into forms. Lydia repeated it at dinners. Grant protected it with silence. But the moment I chose my own counsel, my own documents, my own understanding, they lost the most important part of their control. They could still be loud. They could still be angry. They could no longer be believed automatically. I walked out of the church hall with Noah in my arms and my mother beside me. Behind us, voices began rising. Lydia demanding answers. Grant asking Margaret who his father was. Samuel telling everyone to stop talking. Margaret saying William's name over and over, as if repetition could bring back the version of him she preferred. Outside, the air was cold enough to sting. Noah woke as I buckled him into his car seat. He looked up at me with sleepy blue-gray eyes and gave a tiny, uncertain smile. That was when I cried. Not in the hall, not in front of Margaret, not while Grant watched. I cried in the parking lot with my hands on the edge of my son's car seat, because the thing I had been holding back all day finally found a safe place to land. My mother stood beside me and rubbed my back. "You did good," she whispered. I shook my head. "I should have done it sooner." "No," she said. "You did it when you were ready." I looked through the Chursler Satz the people were watching, so and people were still inside. Probably rewriting the story as quickly as they could. Margaret was shocked. Grant was betrayed. Elena had gone too far. The documents were private. The timing was cruel. I knew how small towns worked. By sunset, there would be versions. But for the first time since I married into the Harper family, I was not afraid of versions. I had copies. The following Monday, I met with an attorney named Renee Caldwell. Her office was above a pharmacy on Main Street. And she had a way of listening that made silence feel productive instead of lonely. I brought every document: Samuel's unsigned forms, the certified birth records, William's probate clause, notes from the baptism, names of witnesses. Renee read for nearly 20 minutes without speaking. Then she removed her glasses and said, "Mrs. Harper, I am very glad you did not sign anything." That sentence felt like a hand closing around mine. She explained what came next. We would file to clarify Noah's protected interest. We would notify the probate court that I had been pressured to sign documents under circumstances in these involve public disparagement of the minor child. We would request that any trust administration involving Noah exclude Margaret unless ordered otherwise. Can they fight it? I asked. They can try, Renee said. But your mother-in-law created a room full of witnesses before she understood what the document said. I almost laughed. Margaret had always trusted public pressure. Now public pressure had become evidence. Grant called 17 times that week. I answered once. He sounded exhausted. "Elena, I need to see Noah." "You can see him through a temporary arrangement," I said. "Renee will send the terms." "Temporary arrangement? I'm his father." "Yes," I said, "and I am his mother." "The one who refused to sign him over to people who denied him in public?" He was quiet, then he said, "I didn't know Mom was going to say that." "But you knew she thought it." No answer. That was the thing about Grant. He always wanted credit for not knowing the final blow was coming, while ignoring all the smaller blows he had watched land. He said, "My whole life just changed." I closed my eyes. "I know. I found out my father wasn't my father." "No," I said gently. "You found out William Harper was not your biological father. But from what those records say, he chose you. He gave you his name, his protection, and his rights. Do not use that pain as an excuse to let your mother take those things from Noah." His breathing changed. "Elena, I'm sorry. I had imagined those words many times. I thought they would feel larger. They felt tired." "Sorry is a beginning," I said. "It is not a repair." Margaret did not call me. She sent a letter, not a handwritten one. Margaret would never risk ink revealing emotion. It was typed on cream stationery and delivered by courier. Because, of course it was. She said the baptism had become unfortunate. She said emotions had been high. She said family matters were complex. She said she hoped I would consider Noah's need for heritage and stability. She did not say she was sorry. She did not write my son's name until the final paragraph. Renee read the letter and said, "This is not an apology. This is a positioning statement." I said, "That sounds like Margaret." 2 weeks later, the probate court issued temporary protective instructions. Margaret was not to act on behalf of Noah's trust interest. Samuel Price was required to provide all prior drafts and communications related to the consent forms. Any future contact about Noah's beneficiary status had to go through counsel. That was the first real consequence. Not gossip, not shame. A boundary with a court seal. Lydia came to see me once. I almost did not open the door. She stood on my porch wearing sunglasses, though the sky was cloudy. "I didn't know," she said. I believed her, not because Lydia was kind. She was not. But because her anger had shifted from me to Margaret. And anger often points toward the newest truth. "I'm not here to apologize," she added. "I didn't expect you to." She looked past me into the house, where Noah was babbling in his playpen. "I said things." "Yes." "Cruel things." "Yes." Her mouth tightened. "I thought you were using him." I waited. She took off her sunglasses. "I think maybe all of us were being used." That was the closest Lydia Harper could come to remorse at the time. I did not invite her in. Forgiveness is not a door people get to open from the outside. 3 months later, the Harper house went up for internal trust review. That was the phrase Renee used. Internal trust review. It sounded boring enough to put a person to sleep. But inside that phrase was the collapse of Margaret's kingdom. The house she had ruled for decades was not hers outright. The family assets were more restricted than she had let anyone believe. William had arranged the trust to prevent one adult from using the property as a weapon against the next generation. And because Noah was now the first minor child lawfully registered in the next generation, any major decision involving the core property had to consider his protected interest. Margaret could live there. She could not leverage it freely. She could not use it to force compliance. She could not threaten to cut Noah out of something William had already written him into. The name she had used like a locked gate had become, through William's own planning, a shield around my son. Grant moved out of the Harper house 6 weeks after the baptism. Not back in with me. That is important. This is not the kind of story where a man stays silent for years, says sorry twice, and the woman runs back because the music swells. Grant rented a small apartment near the hardware store and started therapy. He met Noah twice a week under the temporary schedule, and to his credit, he showed up on time. He also began asking questions about William. Arthur eventually told me carefully that Grant had requested his own records properly. Not through Margaret, not through Samuel, properly. Maybe he would become better, maybe he would not. That was no longer the center of my life. Margaret lost more than control of the trust. She lost the room. In Faircross, that mattered. People who once let her define every story began asking different questions. Why had she brought legal papers to a baptism? Why had she called a baby not family? Why had she spoken so loudly about Harper blood when Grant's own record told a more complicated story? The church ladies did not abandon her all at once. Women like Margaret rarely fall in one dramatic motion. Their power thins, invitations slow, conversations pause when they enter. People stop asking their opinion. First, that is its own kind of justice. Quiet, but thorough. One Sunday morning, almost 5 months after the baptism, I took Noah to the park near the library. The Harper Children's Garden was there, with William's name on a bronze plaque by the entrance. I had avoided it for months because I did not want to stand under that name with my son and feel watched by a dead man's legacy. But that morning, Noah was restless, the sky was clear, and I was tired of letting the Harper name decide where I could breathe. So we went. Noah sat in the baby swing, laughing every time I pushed him gently forward. His little shoes kicked the air, sunlight moved over his hair. I looked at the plaque. William James Harper, beloved husband, devoted father, builder of this community. For the first time, those words did not feel simple. Maybe William had been devoted. Maybe he had been proud. Maybe he had also been a man who understood that family was sometimes a decision made in a lawyer's office, signed in ink, and defended long after death. I would never know everything about him, but I knew this. He had built a protection Margaret could not undo, and when my son needed it, the record held. Arthur Bell joined us at the park bench 10 minutes later. He claimed he had been walking by. Though Arthur was not a man who accidentally walked anywhere. He watched Noah swing for a while. "He looks happy," he said. "He is." Arthur nodded. That is the best outcome in most records. The child goes on living, while adults argue over what to call things. I smiled. "Thank you for bringing the folder. You requested it properly." "That's not what I mean." He looked down at his hands. After a moment, he said, "Years ago, William Harper came into the records office after that acknowledgment was filed. I was young then, Knew. He asked me if the amendment made the boy his son in every way that mattered. What did you tell him? I told him the law recognized the relationship. Arthur looked toward Noah. William said, Good. Then make sure the paper outlives the shame. My throat tightened. Arthur stood slowly. Some papers do. He left me there with that sentence, make sure the paper outlives the shame. That evening, after Noah fell asleep, I took out the folder from Renee's office and read the document one more time. Not because I needed proof, because I needed to see the shape of the truth without panic around it. Grant's original record, the acknowledgment, William's clause, Noah's birth certificate, 4 documents connected across decades by choices people tried to hide, explain, weaponize, and finally understand. Margaret had believed belonging was something she could grant or deny. Grant had believed silence would keep him safe. Lydia had believed cruelty was harmless when the room agreed with it. Samuel had believed I would be too intimidated to read. They were all wrong, because the thing about records is that they are patient. They wait beneath dust, inside boxes, behind counters, under seals, in courthouse basements and old filing cabinets. They wait while families lie at dinner tables. They wait while powerful people build reputations on missing pages. They wait while quiet women are told not to make a scene. Then, one day, someone asks the right question, and the page comes forward. I did not destroy the Harper family. That is what Margaret told people for a while. Elena destroyed us. Elena aired private matters. Elena turned a baptism into a courtroom. But I know what happened. Margaret brought shame into that church hall and aimed it at my child. I brought documents. There is a difference. A year after the baptism, Noah took his first steps in the hallway of my new apartment. Not the house Grant and I had shared, not the Harper house. Mine. He wobbled from the couch to the coffee table, arms out, laughing like gravity was a joke he had decided not to respect. My mother clapped. I cried again, because motherhood had turned me into the kind of woman who could survive public humiliation, but fall apart over 3 baby steps. On the shelf near the window, I kept one framed document, not the trust clause, not Grant's record, Noah's birth certificate, Noah James Harper, mother, Elena Marie Harper, father, Grant William Harper. A simple record, a beginning, a fact. People think revenge has to be loud to be satisfying. They imagine shouting, exposure, dramatic exits, someone begging in the rain. But the calmest revenge is sometimes this. A mother reads before she signs. A clerk trusts the record more than the room. A baby keeps the name they tried to use against him. And a woman finally understands that she never needed to be welcomed by people who confused cruelty with heritage. The last time I saw Margaret Harper, it was outside the courthouse after a routine trust hearing. She looked smaller, though I do not think she had physically changed. Power makes people seem taller until it leaves them. She stood beside Samuel Price, clutching her purse with both hands. For a moment, I thought she would ignore me. Instead, she walked over. Elena, she said. I waited. Her eyes moved to Noah, who was balanced on my hip, chewing the ear of a stuffed rabbit. He looks like Grant at that age, she said. Maybe he did. Maybe he did not. I said, he looks like himself. Her mouth tightened. Then she said, very quietly, I was protecting my family. I looked at her for a long time. No, I said, you were protecting your version of it. She flinched. I shifted Noah higher on my hip. The difference matters. I walked away before she could answer. Not because I was afraid of what she might say, because I no longer needed the last word. That is how I know I am free. Not because Margaret was exposed, not because the documents proved her wrong, not because the trust protected Noah. Those things mattered, But freedom came later, quietly, in ordinary moments. When I stopped rehearsing arguments in the shower. When I stopped checking Grant's face before answering his mother. When I stopped feeling grateful for basic respect. When I realized my son would grow up with at least one parent who never let anyone call him a mistake without consequence. And if one day Noah asks me about the Harper name, I will tell him the truth. Not the cruel version, not the polished version, the whole one. I will tell him that names can be gifts, burdens, shields, and weapons. I will tell him that blood is not the only thing that makes a family, and law is not the only thing that protects one. I will tell him that his great-grandfather once made a choice in ink that mattered decades later. I will tell him that his grandmother was wrong, his father was silent, and his mother was scared. Then I will tell him that being scared did not stop me. Because on the day Margaret Harper stood in front of an entire church and said my son was never a real Harper, I asked her one question. Is that what you believe? She did believe it. That was her mistake. Because belief is not proof. And when Arthur Bell walked through that door with the original birth certificate, proof finally entered the room. The woman who tried to erase my son learned that the Harper name had never belonged to her anger. It belonged to the record, and the record said Noah stayed.